Hello everybody. So I'm watching Arrow and Flash for the first time, and today I'm going to talk about Arrow Season 6. Let's go. So overall, I think that this season was the best season of Arrow since Season 2. I think that definitely isn't as good as the first two seasons. I still think it's a downgrade, but it's a lot better than the past few seasons have been, and I think they do some really cool stuff. There's definitely some stuff towards the end of Season 5 that I think was better than this, but the reason that I think this season is better than Season 5 is because Season 5 was more inconsistent with my enjoyment of it. Like I said in my video about that, the first half of Season 5 I think was some of the worst Arrow I've ever seen, but then the last half was some of the best of Arrow I've ever seen, so that's why it's a weird season to kind of figure out my thoughts on, because there's just such a stark difference between the beginning and end of it. So I think Season 6 did a much better job at staying consistent throughout it with my enjoyment and doing interesting stuff. But to get into it, I'll start off talking about Season 5 ends on a cliffhanger, and this season starts out and it shows what happened. It fulfills the cliffhanger in flashbacks. It kind of does what Flash Season 2 did with the ending of Season 1 of the Singularity. It shows what happened in flashbacks throughout the first episode, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I think I would like it a lot better had they just dedicated the first 10 minutes of the episode to showing what happened, and then doing the intro for the Arrow intro, and then going to the rest of the episode, whatever it is, 5 months later. I think that would have been a lot better than doing it in flashbacks, but it's fine. And so basically what happened was almost all the characters survived, but there's a few that died. There's only one. William's mom dies, and so that creates a situation where Oliver now has to be a father to William for the first time. So that adds this new element to the season that I think they did a pretty good job with. Thea, you at first think died. When you first find her, you're like, oh no, they killed off Thea, but no, don't worry, she's just in a coma. That doesn't sound much better. Diggle got hit with some shrapnel, so now his arm is all messed up. So he's having trouble pulling, the trigger on his guns. He has this tremor, so that's kind of one consequence that is kind of developed throughout the season. Black Siren, Laurel from Earth 2, is thought to be dead, thought to be killed by Quentin, but we find out she actually survived. She was saved by Kate and James, and now she's working for him, and she actually gets a nice arc throughout this season. A nice character arc. I'll get to that later. But lastly, Renee gets a new suit. He looks awesome now. It's not actually related to the cliffhanger, but I just wanted to point that out. Renee's suit looks so much better this season than it did last season, because last season just looked like, well, exactly what it is. Somebody just put a bunch of random stuff around their house together. They got a football jersey and a hockey mask and went out and started to be a vigilante. So I definitely think that this suit looks a lot better. So yeah. Again, doesn't have to do with the cliffhanger, just wanted to point that out. But besides the flashbacks in this episode, since last season kind of ended the 5-year flashbacks of Oliver on the island or not on the island, the 5 years that he was stranded. Since that kind of ended last season, there's no flashbacks here unless it makes sense in an episode to have a flashback. Like there's a flashback when there's 2 episodes with Slade Wilson where they do flashbacks, and there's also an episode where we have a flashback to Caden James and his son. But for most of the season, there's no flashbacks, and I have to say, I do not miss them at all. I think that that's one reason why I think this season was a lot better, was you didn't have the, to go back to the flashbacks to the 5 years, and, I think they really did not do a good job at showing what he was doing in the 5 years for the past 3 seasons. I think, they just didn't do a good job at all with that. I think they did a good job in the last half of last season, or at least a better job than they had been. I think they did some interesting stuff with showing him become the Arrow, the Hood, the Green Arrow, whatever he was being called at that point. But mostly, when you have stuff with him in Hong Kong, and then back on the end, you finding a magical person, and then in Russia, it's not really interesting. So I'm glad that they that they got rid of the flashbacks. I think that was definitely a win for the show. But moving on to the big thing that happens at the end of the first episode, Oliver is outed as the Green Arrow. Now, this is something that's happened before. It's happened pretty early on in season 1, and then it's happened at some point in season 3. I don't remember when, but at some point in season 3, he was also outed as the Green Arrow. And then here it happens once again, but this time it sticks a little bit more. Obviously doesn't immediately stick. It's kind of a thing throughout the season where Oliver is trying to fight off the accusations that he's the Green Arrow. Eventually he ends up getting impeached, so he's no longer the mayor, and there ends up being a trial, which he ends up winning, but then he has to get help from the FBI, who have been, investigating him this whole time. Up to that point, he kind of won. They kind of backed off, but at the end of the season, he has to go to them, ask for their help to defeat the villain, and in exchange for that, he has to turn himself in as the Green Arrow. And at the end of the season, he gets taken to the Supermax prison, but I'll get to that later in the video. So that's kind of a through line throughout the season, but really, I think this season does a good job at having arcs throughout it. So, at the beginning of the season, you have this arc where Diggle's the Green Arrow, and so Oliver asks Diggle to be the Green Arrow because he's realized that since he has to take care of William now, he can't really be going out every night risking his life, and so he asks Diggle to be the Green Arrow to take over for him, and he kind of retires being the Green Arrow. But the problem is that Diggle, since he got the shrapnel in his arm from, Lian Yu blowing up, he now has, as I mentioned before, has the tremors. He can't really pull the triggers on his gun. He can't really pull the trigger on the crossbow that Felicity and Curtis make for him. And so that adds some tension there where it's like, oh, he's not really in the best shape to be doing this, but he kind of feels like he has to, because Oliver asked him, and also this is something that he really wants, because in the Invasion crossover from last season, we see when they were put in the shared hallucination by the Dominators. I must call them Dementors. This isn't Harry Potter. The Dominators, when they were put in that shared hallucination and they were shown what their perfect lives would be, Diggle saw himself as the Green Arrow, and so he kind of feels like this is something that he never realized he wanted, but he does want. And so when Oliver asks him to be the Green Arrow, he's jumps at the chance, he wants to do it. Even though he has the problem with his arm, he's not in the best shape to be doing it. And so, at first, when Oliver asked him to be the Green Arrow, I was like, I don't know. I don't think this is going to work very well. I don't know if that dynamic works, not having Oliver on the team. I don't know how this is gonna work, but it ended up surprisingly working well. I think that again, the whole thing with his arm added some tension to it, where he ended up getting some illegal drugs to, fix his arm, and eventually he had to end up taking down the drug dealer, and so now we have this situation where he no longer has what he needs to fix his arm. But then Curtis and Felicity make him this chip that will fix his arm, and this doesn't work at first. So while Diggle heals, Oliver decides to come back as a Green Arrow. But before this happens, we get this mini arc in here with Slade Wilson, which, I mean, come on. Slade Wilson is great. I love anytime we get to see him. And it's cool that we get to see him on our side this time. We get to, since the Mercuru had worn off by the end of last season, he's now back on our side. And he teams up with Oliver to go find his son, who ends up now being evil, and they have to fight him. And this gave Oliver some interesting stuff to do while Diggle was the Green Arrow. I think that's another part of the reason why the arc where Diggle was the Green Arrow worked a lot better than I thought it was going to, because they give Oliver stuff to do. So, yeah. So, I really liked this 2-episode arc here. I think they did a good job with that, because again, it's always so cool to see Slade Wilson taking out a bunch of bad guys. Slade Wilson is awesome. And we also get some interesting flashbacks here, especially in the second episode, where we see in the flashbacks, we see kind of bridging the gap between the flashbacks of Season 2 and the modern day stuff of Season 2, how he got from when Oliver stabbed him in the eye with an arrow at the end of the flashbacks in Season 2 to when he comes back to Star City and all of the events of Season 2 take place. We kind of see how he got from there to there, and we get to see Mirakuru, Slade Wilson, in these flashbacks, which is cool also because, as I just mentioned, the Mirakuru had worn off for our modern, present day Slade Wilson. So it's cool to see in the flashbacks being able to continue to see Mirakuru Slade Wilson. But anyway, moving on to another thing I mentioned earlier in the video is we have Black Siren, Laurel from Earth 2 in this season. She plays a pretty big part, and she has a cool arc in it where she starts out, a bad guy working for the villain, but then as the season progresses, she kind of goes back and forth as to whether she's going to try to be good or try to be bad, and eventually by the end of it, she decides to be good, to embrace the Laurel inside. And there's some interesting stuff with her and Quentin, because obviously, Quentin lost Laurel in Season 4, and so he's trying to make this Laurel his Laurel. He's trying to get his Laurel back, and so that created an interesting dynamic where, he wants her to be like his Laurel, but she's really completely different. That's one thing I like about stuff they're doing on Arrow and Flash with the doppelgangers, how they're showing how different people can be on different Earths. Like, they've definitely done on The Flash, done this with Harrison Wells, where, they've shown multiple Harrison Wells from various Earths throughout the show The Flash, and each of them are completely different from the others, which I liked. I think that was, that's really cool to see just all those differences. And so here we see that there's some major differences between Black Siren Laurel and our Laurel that died in Season 4. So I like that. Also, it's cool for these actors to be able to play the same characters with different versions, to play the same character but make it completely different. I think it's cool seeing, like, it really showcases these actors' acting abilities to have, the actor who plays Laurel be able to play, you know, the same character for 4 seasons, and then here get to play the same character but completely differently. Um, I think that's cool to see. It's cool she gets an arc throughout it, also. But moving on to something that kind of takes place throughout the last half of the season. The team breaks up. So since there's the whole investigation of Oliver being the Green Arrow and the FBI is after him, Quentin tells him that somebody on his team told the FBI that he's the Green Arrow. And so because he gets this information, he decides to basically spy on Renee, Curtis, and Dinah because, obviously he knows Felicity and Diggle didn't do it because they're both in the same room as him when he's doing this. So he tracks them to try to figure out which one of them may have told the FBI about him. And so it ends up being Renee, and we find out he did it because of his daughter. The FBI, he figured that if he told them he was the Green Arrow, he'd be able to protect his daughter. But then, since Oliver spied on them, they all feel that, he didn't have trust in them, and, they decide to quit the team because they don't want to be working for someone who didn't trust them, which is like, okay, yeah, I could see that, but at the same time, he was told by Quentin that somebody on his team ratted him out, so it's like, it wasn't just like, oh, out of the blue, he spies on them. It's like, no, he was told somebody, one of them, told on him. So, obviously, what he's going to do next is, try to figure out which one did it. And obviously he thinks each one of them are trustworthy. Obviously he thinks that, he doesn't really think that any of them would have done it, which is why he has to spy on all of them, because there's not one that he's like, oh, this one definitely did it. He does think that Dinah did it, but that's also because she was lying to them about Vincent, so it's like, yeah, if she's lying about that, she could be lying about something else. So, I don't know. I think that they were a bit too quick to quit the team. I think that they should have looked at it like, okay, yeah, Oliver spied on us, but it wasn't just, oh, I don't trust them. It was, no, he knew one of them did it, and one of them did do it. And it was Renee, which is, he's the one that I wouldn't have thought did it. I was thinking it was either going to be Curtis or Dinah, but it was Renee. So it wasn't somebody who you would think did it, so I don't know. It seemed weird that I think they were just a bit too quick to quit the team, but they do. They quit, they create their own team, and one weird thing for like a few episodes here is that they're supposed to be separate teams, but they communicate like with each other for like 5 episodes straight. It's like, wait, aren't you guys supposed to be different teams? Like, for different teams, you're really talking to each other a lot. But eventually they break off completely because there's this whole thing where, Oliver, Felicity, and Diggle are trying to save Black Siren Laurel, but Curtis, Renee, and Dinah don't trust her because she killed Vincent, and so there's this whole fight between them as to whether or not, what's going to happen with Laurel, Black Siren, and they decide to break off completely, but it's not like a mutual thing. Like, Renee is injured, Curtis and Dinah decide, nope, we're done with you, you hurt Renee, but it's like, okay, but you also hurt Diggle, and you also were the ones who went and confronted them and attacked them, so I don't know, it's like you guys did horrible things, and then you're getting mad at Diggle and Felicity and Oliver for it, and it just seemed really weird. Also plus the fact that we don't, as the viewers, we obviously care a lot more about Oliver, Felicity, and Diggle than we do of Renee, Curtis, and Dinah. So, because they're the new characters that were introduced last season, so we obviously care about the main three. So we're obviously going to be on their side by default. So I don't know. It just seemed like a weird thing where you're just kind of looking at it and you're just like, guys, you're being jerks. You realize that, like, they just come off as being jerks throughout it, and it's just, I don't know. You're not really seeing like why they really broke. Like you kind of understand it, but at the same time you're like, this is completely ridiculous. Like, what are you guys doing? Obviously, you not communicating is the problem here. Like, obviously, if you guys just communicated with each other, then a lot of the stuff that happens, a lot of the bad stuff that you're mad at the other people for letting happen, wouldn't have happened if you communicated with them. Like, Vincent wouldn't have died. Kate and James wouldn't have gotten the bomb. Black Siren wouldn't have gotten away. But they just don't understand it, and instead they decide to split up more, and it's just really annoying. I think I didn't really buy into this plot line that much. I just kind of just felt like that Renee, Curtis, and Dinah were just being jerks, and so, yeah. I wasn't the biggest fan of this plot line, but I think it is an interesting thing to explore, so, yeah. I don't know. I didn't really enjoy it as much, but moving on to our main villain of the season, Ricardo Diaz. And I like that they don't introduce him as the villain immediately, because the past few seasons have introduced their main villains in the first episode. In season 4, and we're immediately introduced to Damien Dark. And in season 5, at the end of the first episode, we're introduced to Prometheus. But here, we're really not introduced to Ricardo Diaz until, he's introduced as the guy who is giving Diggle the drugs to fix his arm, but you're not really seeing him as the main villain. You're just like, oh, he's just kind of this throwaway villain. He's just the person who's giving Diggle the drugs for his arm. That's all you're really thinking of him. And then you see he's working with Kate and James, and you think that Kate and James is the main villain at that point, but then Kate and James gets defeated, and then Diaz ends up killing Kate and James, and then it's fully revealed Diaz is the main villain of the season. He has all this control over the city, and I think he was a good villain. Arguably, I think was the most dangerous villain of them, because of all of the villains, because he was just a psychopath throughout it. Like, he did not care about killing people. He burned somebody alive just based off of a childhood grudge. I think he's one of the most dangerous villains and the most powerful, because he takes over the entire city. Like, there's so many, head officials and people in the police department, and so many people very important people throughout the city, who are all under his thumb, who are all working for him. He has so much power, and I think he was a really good villain. But going back to Kate and James, we have kind of for the first half of the season, Kate and James is the main villain, and there's this whole thing where he believes that Oliver killed his son, but Oliver wasn't in Star City at the time that his son was killed, so Team Arrow obviously know that this isn't true, that somebody is tricking Kate and James. Somebody sent him false footage that seems to be evidence that Oliver killed his son, but in reality is completely fabricated. Also, another thing with Kate and James that's interesting is last season when Felicity was working with Helix, she ends up setting him free, and so I think that's interesting to show, her actions here, working with people who aren't exactly the best people had consequences, and that, you know, she ended up setting a very dangerous person free that became, you know, a main villain for the first half of this season. But eventually they're able to reveal to Kate and James that the evidence he got was fabricated, and that somebody working for him uh, is behind it. And so we eventually find out that it was Ricardo Diaz, that it was his whole plan to trick Kate and James into pretty much gaining power over the city and then giving it to him. Um, so it's this whole plan where he doesn't have to be the one to actually gain the power. He just has to take it from someone else, and that person is Kate and James. Yeah, so that's another reason why I think that he's one of the most dangerous and powerful villains here on this that's been on this show, because he just has it all figured out, and it's believable that he can have it figured out. So yeah, I think Ricardo Diaz was a really great villain. But I'll move on to talk about Roy. We get Roy back this season for a little bit. We find out that Diaz had his people capture Roy to get him to testify against Oliver. And so Team Arrow, including Thea comes back to save Roy. And once they get him, Thea decides to go with Roy to run away together. But they end up getting attacked by the new League of Assassins, and Nyssa Al Ghul saves them and tells them, basically, before Malcolm Merlyn died, he had created a new League of Assassins from his loyal followers, and he made this map to 2 other Lazarus pits, and the only person who can access it is Thea, because somehow her blood makes it appear on the paper because of bacteria or something. It was a weird explanation, but Thea is somehow the key to unlocking this map, and that's why the new League of Assassins is after her, because they want to find the map. But Team Arrow, they find the map, they see what's on it. Once again, they find out that it leads to 2 other Lazarus pits. So Thea, Roy, and Nyssa decide to go out and search for them and destroy them. Which I'm kind of like, alright, you can go find them. Maybe take a few dead characters with you. Maybe give Constantine a call. Do what he did with Sarah. Get Tommy. Get Moira. Get Laurel. Quentin Dies at the end of this season. Get him. Get some Flash characters who are died. Get Barry's parents. Get Iris's mom. Just get everybody together. Get HR. Get them all together. Bring them to these Lazarus pits. Give Constantine a call. And let's bring people back to life. Yeah. Obviously, I am glad that they're going to destroy the Lazarus pits because, as I mentioned in my video about Season 4, I think that the Lazarus Pit is such an easy plot device to use to just bring any character back, and it's just such a tempting thing that I think it's much better to destroy it. Of course, I feel like somebody's going to be brought back to life. I feel like introducing 2 new Lazarus Pits and then not having them be used, I don't know why they would do that, but I hope that they do that, because I don't want to have it be used again. I think we've had enough of that, but I'll see what happens. I don't know. I think that the idea of 2 Lazarus Pits is a bad idea, and I hope they just get destroyed, and that's the end of it. But I feel like it probably won't be. But it was cool to see Roy again. I think he's a great character, and I hope, since Oliver kind of clears his name at the end of the season, where he says, Roy isn't the Green Arrow, Tommy isn't the Green Arrow, because there's this whole thing in his trial where they have the guy who's able to pretend he's any person. It was like the Human Target or something. Something Chance, his name is.
Christopher Chance.
That guy, they have him come in and pretend to be Tommy as the Green Arrow. And so, since Oliver, at the end of the season, makes the announcement that he's the Green Arrow, that Tommy isn't, Roy isn't, hopefully that kind of clears Roy's name. He's able to, come back and, return to his normal life and hopefully return to Team Arrow. I think that would be really cool. So yeah, I like that we have Roy back. We also have this conflict between Oliver and Diggle, where it starts out where Diggle is all healed with his arm because Felicity and Curtis's chip worked, and so he's like, "All right, I'm ready to be the Green Arrow again." And Oliver's like, Oliver doesn't want to give up the mantle because he's realized that it completes him, that it's now a part of him, and he doesn't want to give it back to Diggle. And at first, Diggle is kind of hurt by this. He kind of, he wanted to be the Green Arrow, but he's able to accept it. But there's still something wrong. There's still, he's still mad for some reason, and he realizes that he's mad at Oliver's leadership. He thinks that Oliver isn't a good leader, that he's the reason why, Renee, Dinah, and Curtis left, and he says that he thinks that Oliver, his leadership, alienates people, and throughout the years, he has certainly become a better man, a better person, but he has not become a better leader. He has actually become a worse leader, a worse hero, and they end up getting in a fight. Diggle decides to leave. He thinks that to be his best self, he can't work with Oliver anymore, and so he leaves. He ends up joining Argus, and I thought that was an interesting plotline. I feel like it was just kind of thrown in there as like, oh look, everybody's leaving Oliver, and it's like, well, I don't know that, there wasn't really enough setup for this, for Diggle to say this, so I don't know. I think that this is an interesting thing to have happen, but I don't, kind of same thing with having the, Renee, Curtis, and Dinah leave the team. It's an interesting thing, but I don't think I enjoyed it. I don't think it was a good thing to have happen. I don't think it worked very well, so, so it was interesting, but it didn't really work. And it ends up kind of getting resolved too easy at the end of it. Same thing with the team coming back together. In the finale, they just kind of come back together, and that's just kind of what happens. There's not a lot to it. It's just like, yep, they're back. They have to take down Diaz, so they're back, and it's like, I wish we got a little bit more to that, but it just kind of just happens. Diggle's back, the team gets back together, and you just kind of have to accept that. But before this, Oliver decides to take his crusade back to basics to say, alright, there's no more Team Arrow, no more Diggle. Now I'm going to say no more Felicity. I'm just going to do it on my own. And he realizes that he's been stretching himself too thin with being, a mayor, a father, a husband, a hero, a leader. And he's like, okay, I need to take things back to basics and just do it on my own and, not have to worry about a team being out there with me, having to protect them, just going out, doing it myself, and I just have to make sure I make it through it. So, I thought that was interesting. It obviously doesn't last very long because in the finale, as I said, the team just comes back together, but I thought that was an interesting thing to have happen. But speaking of the finale, again, the team just kind of comes back together to fight Diaz. Oliver ends up getting help from the FBI, taking down Diaz in exchange for something else, someone else. Sorry, I had to make that joke. We find out that Diaz has Black Siren Laurel captured because in Oliver's trial, instead of testifying that Oliver is the Green Arrow, she instead says that Tommy is the Green Arrow, and obviously Diaz doesn't like that, so he captures her, and he tells Quentin to kick the FBI out of the city, because Quentin is now the mayor since Oliver got impeached. So he tells Quentin, kick the FBI out of Star City, or he's going to kill Laurel. Quentin then asks for proof of life, so Diaz takes him to see Laurel, and Team Arrow is able to track him using his pacemaker. So they come in, they free them, but before this, Diaz goes to shoot Laurel, and Quentin gets in the way, and so he ends up getting shot. So anyway, Team Arrow, they come, they free them. Oliver's about to kill Diaz, but Black Siren ends up screaming him off the edge of the building. That is a weird sentence I never thought I would say. And he somehow survives. He somehow survives being screamed off of a building into water. He survives that. But luckily, before this, Oliver was able to copy everything that was on this flash drive on Diaz's neck that said that that had all the information on who was on his payroll, who was working for him, and so he's able to save the city, take down all of the corrupt people in it, and Quentin is taken to a hospital where he ends up dying. But before this, Oliver and him were able to have this nice kind of father-son conversation. They're not, obviously not father and son, but there's I think this season does a good job at leaning into that kind of relationship that has kind of been being developed throughout the shows up to this point. They really lean into it here. Their father-son relationship, even at Oliver and Felicity's wedding, he gives him this watch that his father had given him. He gives it to Oliver, and so there's just stuff like that that I think really shows the father-son relationship they have. So they have a good moment in the hospital here before he's taken into the OR and dies. I feel like his death, they didn't really do it well. I feel like it just kind of happens, just kind of, the doctor comes out and is like, yeah, he died, and you're like, wait, they just killed Quentin? Except I already kind of knew he died, because that's one of the, at this point, many things have gotten spoiled for me about this show. So, yeah. So I kind of already knew Quentin dies at some point in the show. I think I gotten spoiled that it was season 6. So, yeah. So I knew this was coming, and yeah, it just wasn't done very well. It was kind of, yeah, he's dead, and he's kind of like, oh, so we're not going to see Quentin at all for the rest of the show. Okay. Also, even just, I think, watching it for the first time, you kind of know it's coming when Sarah walks in, and you're like, oh boy, here, okay, he's gonna die. You have his other daughter here. You're not gonna bring her in if the character is not about to die. So, yeah, so I think, even if I didn't know that he died here, I probably could have figured it out just based on the fact that Sarah shows up. Yeah, so Quentin dies. It kinda is abrupt, which I guess is kind of the point, like, for the characters. It's also abrupt, like, oh, he's dead, but, I don't know. I don't think it was done very well. But then Oliver is taken by the FBI. You find out what the deal was that he had, where, the deal was the FBI helps him take down Diaz and gives his whole team immunity if he turns himself in and is able to be taken after it's all done. So he gets taken by the FBI, put in a supermax prison, and the season ends. And I'm predicting, obviously, don't tell me below. This is just from me. I'm predicting that Season 7 is going to start out with Diggle being the Green Arrow, since Oliver gave him the suit earlier in the finale. He'll be the Green Arrow, but then there's going to be this main villain, maybe Ricardo Diaz, who the FBI are going to be like, yeah, we kind of have this guy over here, and we're not able to take him down, and your team's not able to take him down, so, yeah, we're going to let you go. Sorry for all of this. We're going to let you go. You can be the Green Arrow again and take this guy down. Sorry about all this. I think that's kind of what's going to happen in Season 7. Again, do not tell me down below. Don't, just for my sake. But, yeah. That's my predictions for what I think is going to happen in Season 7. But overall, I think, again, this season was pretty good. I think it's one of the best, it's the best season of Arrow since Season 2. There's really nothing in it that I was like, this sucks. Like, yeah, the team breaking up and the Diggle Oliver fight, I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I wasn't like, this sucks. I was like, this isn't the greatest, but it was, again, it was an interesting plot line. It wasn't the greatest, but it was still interesting. Yeah, there's really nothing throughout it that I thought was really terrible, and it was pretty consistently good throughout it. Like, it was consistent. My enjoyment throughout it was pretty consistent. Again, unlike Season 5, where there's the stark difference between the beginning and end, this season was very consistently pretty good. Again, not as good as the first two seasons. It has not reached that point again. I think that they've just done too much in the prior seasons to really be able to get back there, but I think this is the best they've done since then, so, yeah. I think the season was pretty good, not great, but it was good. Anyway, please comment below your thoughts on Arrow Season 6 and of the video, and remember to give this video a like, subscribing to the channel, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And with that said, that's a wrap.